A name has been cut from the stone, not by accident, not by age, cut with purpose. The royal face beside it has been hammered until the eyes, nose, and mouth vanish into scars. Blocks from a temple once open to the sun now lie hidden inside later monuments, turned inward like evidence buried in plain sight. This was not random damage, it was a verdict. The pharaoh Egypt tried to erase was Akhenaten of the 18th dynasty, who ruled in the 14th century BCE. He inherited one of the richest kingdoms on earth. Then he changed his name, made the Aten dominant in official state worship, transformed royal art, and built an entire city in the desert for the disk of the sun. Within a generation of his death, that city stood empty. His temples were dismantled. His images were attacked. His name was removed from official memory and later king lists as if those years had never existed. But the sharper fact is this: Akhenaten had used the same weapon first. He had ordered the names and images of older gods struck from monuments across Egypt. The king who attacked divine memory became the one whose memory Egypt attacked in return. To understand why the chisels turned against him, we have to enter the ancient order that made those chisels necessary. Akhenaten was not born Akhenaten. He came to the throne as Amenhotep IV, a name tied to Amun, the powerful hidden god of Thebes. His father, Amenhotep III, had ruled during an age of extraordinary wealth. Gold flowed from Nubia. Foreign courts sought Egyptian favor. Temples, palaces, and festivals proclaimed that Egypt stood near the center of an ordered world. But Amenhotep IV inherited more than a religion. He inherited a system in which temples, land, offices, festivals, royal legitimacy, and cosmic order supported one another. Among its most powerful institutions was the cult of Amun at Karnak. It would be too simple to picture Amun's priests as a rival government. Their strength was real, but it was woven into the same order the pharaoh was expected to protect. The king's duty was to maintain Ma'at, the balance that kept chaos outside the ordered world. Amenhotep IV inherited this machine as its guardian. Almost at once, he began to shift its center. The Aten was the visible disk of the sun. Earlier kings, including Amenhotep III, had already used Aten language and solar imagery. Akhenaten did not invent the sun disk, he elevated it. In his early years, he built major Aten temples at Karnak, beside the religious landscape of Thebes. Traditional temples drew worship inward toward a dark sanctuary and a hidden cult image. Aten worship reversed that movement. Its courts stood open to the sky. The architecture itself declared that the god was not hidden. The god was visible above Egypt every day. Around the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten, one who acts for the Aten. As his reign developed, the harder edge appeared. The names and images of Amun were attacked on monuments across the country. In some cases, even the plural word gods was targeted. In a culture where a written name helped sustain divine presence, this was sacred violence carried out as state policy. Was Atenism pure monotheism? Scholars continue to debate whether it was monotheistic, monolatrous, henotheistic, or an exclusive royal cult that does not fit later categories neatly. What is clear is that Akhenaten concentrated official religious authority around the Aten and presented the royal family as its necessary bridge to Egypt. A new divine order required a new image of kingship. Akhenaten changed how a pharaoh could look. In official art, his body became elongated and unfamiliar. Narrow face, heavy lips, sloping shoulders, rounded abdomen, broad hips. Nefertiti stood beside him with unusual prominence. Their daughters were shown on laps, touching faces, receiving affection beneath the Aten's rays. These scenes can appear intimate, yet they are carefully constructed statements of power. The Aten appears as a disk sending down rays, some ending in hands that offer the Ankh, the sign of life, to the king and queen. In Amarna tomb scenes, the royal family could appear at the window of appearance, rewarding loyal officials with gold, while the Aten's rays descended on the royal house above them. The image was not just domestic tenderness, it was hierarchy made visible. Attempts to diagnose physical conditions from this art remain speculative. The style was a deliberate break with tradition. One visible disc, one royal family, one official truth at the level of the state. Yet he was still surrounded by old monuments, old festivals, old priesthoods, and old memories. So he turned theology into geography. On the east bank of the Nile, where desert cliffs curve around a broad plain, Akhenaten marked out a new capital. He called it Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. Today the site is known as Amarna. Boundary stelae carved into the cliffs presented the location as chosen for the Aten and free of older religious claims. When the sun rose between the cliffs, the landscape echoed the Egyptian sign for Akhet, the horizon where the sun enters the visible world. Akhenaten had turned geography into theology. The city rose with remarkable speed. Palaces, temples, administrative buildings, elite villas, workshops, and residential areas appeared on empty ground. Open courts in the Aten temples held rows of offering tables. A broad royal road linked ceremonial spaces. Akhetaten was not an egalitarian utopia. It was a royal ideological capital created by command and organized around the court. For a brief moment, Akhenaten made his royal program physical. One dominant cult, one royal family, one city built around their authority. But royal monuments show the city as power wanted it remembered. The cemeteries tell a harder story. In the official art of Akhetaten, offering tables overflow with abundance. The royal family receives life directly from the sun. The city appears ordered, bright, and blessed. The human remains from its cemeteries complicate that picture. Study of non-elite burials has found evidence of hard labor, injury, nutritional stress, disease, and many deaths among the young. Life was difficult across much of the ancient world, so this is not a simple verdict on one reign, but it reveals the physical cost of raising a capital quickly. Mud bricks had to be formed, stone had to be quarried and carried. Food and water had to be organized for thousands of workers in a harsh environment. The horizon of the Aten rested on human bodies. Private belief also refused to become simple. Objects connected with older protective traditions have been found in Amarna houses. Household needs, childbirth, illness, danger, family, death, still drove people toward familiar gods. Akhenaten could order the name of Amun removed from a temple wall. He could not erase a mother's fear for her child. The revolution controlled public language more successfully than private anxiety. And beyond the boundaries of Akhetaten, clay tablets were arriving with problems sunlight could not simplify. Centuries later, hundreds of clay tablets were discovered at Amarna. They preserved part of Egypt's diplomatic archive from the reigns of Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, and the years around them. Most were written in Akkadian, the international language of diplomacy. Today they are known as the Amarna Letters. Imagine them entering the palace one after another, a vassal asking for archers, a ruler accusing a neighbor, a great king complaining about gifts and gold. Each tablet was small enough to hold in the hand, but heavy with pressure. They reveal a world of ceremonial friendship, rivalry, fear, flattery, and calculation. They are political weapons, not neutral reports. So they do not prove the simple story that Akhenaten ignored his empire while staring at the sun. Egypt remained diplomatically active. Officials traveled, tribute continued to move. The court still managed foreign relationships, but the contrast is sharp. Inside Akhetaten, royal art presented a universe of perfect order flowing from the Aten through the king. Outside the city, the Hittites were expanding. Local rulers fought, alliances shifted, and every request carried hidden motives. Akhenaten could narrow Egypt's official heavens. He could not narrow the international world, and his system depended on one fragile point: his own presence. The final years of Akhenaten's reign are difficult to reconstruct. Several royal daughters appear to have died. Nefertiti's later role remains uncertain. Other names enter the succession puzzle: Shmenkhara, Nefertiti, and possibly identities or titles we still do not fully understand. We know the names of several possible successors. What we do not know with certainty is who ruled, in what order, and under which identity. That uncertainty is not a side detail. It exposes the weakness at the heart of Akhenaten's system. He had concentrated divine authority around himself and his immediate family. When his reign ended, the identity of the next legitimate center became unclear. We do not know exactly how Akhenaten died. There is no reliable evidence that he was murdered. No surviving account gives his final illness or last words. Sometime around his 17th regnal year, he disappears from the record. The Aten still cross the sky. The open court still receives sunlight. The boundary stele still declared the sacred purpose of Akhetaten, but the voice that held the system together was gone. The people who inherited the revolution began looking for a way out. A young king came to the throne with the name Tutankhaten, the living image of the Aten. Soon he became Tutankhamun. Amun had returned to the royal name. Under the young king and the senior officials around him, the court moved away from Akhetaten. Traditional temples regained royal support. Cult images and religious property were restored. A royal proclamation described temples as neglected and the gods as having abandoned Egypt. Whether read as theology or political repair, the message was clear. The old order had not died. It had been interrupted. The reversal was gradual at first. Officials formed under Akhenaten continued to serve. Amarna traces did not disappear overnight, but the direction was unmistakable. The old temples reopened. The traditional gods returned to public favor. Akhetaten lost the court that gave it purpose. And that mattered because Akhetaten was not a natural economic center that had grown over generations. It depended on the court, state supply, and the Aten cult. When the court left, the reason for the city began to vanish with it. A city created as an eternal horizon began to die. Yet abandonment was only the first stage. Tutankhamun died young. Followed him. Then the throne passed to Horemheb, a military commander outside Akhenaten's immediate royal line. Restoration had already begun before Horemheb. Under him, the attack on Akhenaten's legacy became more systematic. Aten temples were dismantled. Their small standardized stone blocks, often called talatat, were reused inside later pylons, gateways, foundations, and walls. Scenes once designed to proclaim the Aten were turned inward and buried. Images of the sun cult became structural filler inside the restored religious order. Later rulers continued the process. Seti I and Rameses II built across a landscape being cleansed of Amarna memory. Names were removed or replaced. Monuments were dismantled, reused, or usurped. Some later official king lists and royal chronologies effectively passed from Amenhotep III to Horemheb, omitting the Amarna succession. This was not random destruction, it was the editing of state memory. Akhenaten had threatened major temples, redirected royal resources, attacked the name of Amun, and built a competing capital around a cult inseparable from himself. Later kings classified his reign as disorder, and Egyptian kingship claimed to defeat disorder. Akhenaten had once ordered divine names cut from stone because names sustained existence. Now that same logic was turned against him. For centuries, the campaign seemed to work. Akhetaten remained largely abandoned beside the Nile. The official memory of Egypt passed around the Amarna kings. The city of the Aten became a ruin, a quarry, and then a puzzle. But abandonment preserved what restoration wanted forgotten. Because no major later city completely covered the site, archaeologists could recover streets, temples, houses, workshops, palaces, cemeteries, and inscriptions. The failed capital became a rare snapshot of an ancient royal experiment. Elsewhere, reused talatat blocks emerged from later structures. Scholars reconstructed scenes broken apart more than 3,000 years earlier. A hand appeared beneath the Aten's rays. A section of a crown returned from inside another king's monument. Fragments of erased names came back into view. The destruction itself became evidence. Even the possible body of Akhenaten remains uncertain. A male mummy discovered in tomb Kf 55 has often been connected to him, but the identification is debated because of age estimates, genetics, burial history, and the disturbed condition of the tomb. There is no complete Akhenaten waiting to confess. There are fragments, and the fragments are enough to show why later Egypt feared his memory. Akhenaten chose the most visible divine power imaginable. The sun could not be locked inside a sanctuary. It rose over every palace, field, workshop, temple, and grave in Egypt. For a brief moment, one king appeared to have rewritten reality. But the older religious system was deeper than any single sanctuary. It was woven through property, festivals, local cults, burial, political legitimacy, and the daily fears of ordinary people. Akhenaten changed monuments faster than he changed Egypt. When he died, his successors reopened the old temples, abandoned his city, dismantled his buildings, and removed him from the approved sequence of kings. But total erasure proved impossible. Every damaged cartouche preserved the outline of a missing name. Every hidden block carried part of a forbidden image. Every gap in a king list created a question. Akhenaten did not survive in the eternity he designed. He survived in the scars left by those who rejected him. That is the final paradox of Amarna. The man who erased divine names became the Pharaoh Egypt tried to erase. And because Egypt tried so hard to destroy his memory, the world still follows the chisel marks back to his name.